to households, to small and business SMEs, MSMEs that need protection from natural disasters. It was
sustainable economic growth. Previously, APEC work on infrastructure financing involved two items. One, sponsoring platforms for exchange of views, policy experiences, and best practices in the conduct of public-private partnership. And then secondly, capacity building in key areas of infrastructure development and financing. Now, but in the leaders' meeting starting in Bali, that was 2013, they came up with a so-called multi-year plan, which launched the following. One, establishment of a pilot PPP center in Indonesia, establishment of an APEC PPP experts advisory panel, and finally, improvement of the investment climate in APEC economies. Now, this morning, what was highlighted by the speakers are the following. One, there are tremendous infrastructure opportunities across the APEC jurisdictions. Second, the issue is financing. And financing is a very important component, especially given the paradox that in many APEC economies, including the ones in Asia, we have excess savings. And yet, financing infrastructure continues to be quite problematic. And finally, how to establish regional connectivity. Now, basically, what was discussed was to explore alternatives for financing infrastructure, including the leveraging of private funds through the PPP projects, as well as the continuous disposition of public funds in order to advance the cost of infrastructure development in the region. Of course, certain principles were emphasized in the session, particularly on connectivity. In other words, if infrastructures are actually developed and advanced, this has an added benefit of closing the gap, the physical gap, the distance between and among the APEC economies, and lead to more sustainable economic growth in the region. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we are opening the floor for questions. Who would like to ask the first question? Okay, Ben. Please state your name and your organization.
Hi, sirs. Good afternoon. I'm Ben De Vera of Philippine Daily Inquirer. Mr. Guinigundo mentioned that there would be initiatives towards leveraging private funds for PPP projects. Can you expound on that? Would there be any perks given to the private sector that would be invest in PPP projects?
One concrete proposal was precisely the establishment of a regional PPP knowledge management portal. That will provide basic information about opportunities in the region in terms of infrastructure development. And of course, given the portal, that will provide potential investors an idea of where the opportunities arise and are available, and the kind of financing that will be needed in the process. There was also the suggestion of the Philippines precisely to help standardize the PPP contracts. This is notwithstanding the fact that you have differences in terms of legal frameworks across the APEC economies. But nonetheless, the idea was to provide some kind of a template, the key features of what a PPP contract should have, so that we can uphold good governance in conducting those PPP projects, and in the process encourage more interest in the public-private partnership.
A quick follow-up, sir. When do you intend to roll out this knowledge management portal and also standardize? Are there any targets, timetable for this?
Well, actually, it is a suggestion, and I think some of the key components have actually been completed by our own Philippines PPP Center. So all we need to do is precisely to transform this into a regional portal, and the other members of the APEC can hook in and provide some information that will in turn provide information to potential investors in those various infra projects.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, it says here, short term.
Short term.
So it will be done
Yeah.
within 1 or 2 years.
So this is just not just for the portal, but how about the standardization of contracts? Is there any
Also short term.
alright.
All the PPPs are short term.
Very urgent. Yeah, there is
We will
urgency.
try to do this very quickly.
Alright, okay, thank you.
Next question, please.
Short term lahat po.
Okay. Please state your name and your organization.
Hi, I'm Ria Fernandez from People's Television Network. My question is addressed to Mr. Diwa. Sir, you mentioned earlier that paradoxically, we have an excess savings yet we have problems in financing. Meron po ba tayong mga specific measures which have been proposed during the two-day finance and deputies or central bank deputies meeting to address this problem?
Not as specific as what kind of projects will be financed, but the point is to be able to leverage on our existing savings in the region, and then identify some of the key projects in the PPP framework. The problem with many emerging markets is that while we have the savings, we don't have sufficient number of bankable and credible infrastructure projects. If we are able to provide the member countries with a sufficient number of projects that are bankable, that which can be undertaken immediately, I think we would have a good use of our excess savings. What happens is that those excess savings end up in the banks or end up buying government securities. So instead of funding tangible, actual infrastructure projects, they end up as such financial resources. What we need to do is precisely to translate these financial assets into concrete, real assets.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Next question, please. Okay, Mika.
Good afternoon. I'm Mika Flores of Business World. Gov, what's the total excess savings of the region based on your discussions? And yeah, yun muna.
Sige, sige.
Namin dalang statistics na.
Hindi ka pinagtatawanan ni Hil,
Hindi ikaw.
Tapos na?
Apa.
Well, we don't have the exact number, the exact amount, but
Estimate,
this
sir.
was pointed out by one of the presenters. I think particularly the Asian Development Bank, no? But we can provide you with the numbers, you know. The point that was emphasized by the Asian Development Bank is that opportunities are available in terms of developing infrastructure across the region. Financing should not be problematic because in the region you have excess savings. Now, how much is that excess savings? I don't have the numbers with me, but we can provide you with the numbers later on. And then the third issue that was raised by the Asian Development Bank is precisely the benefit of establishing regional connectivity. And that can be made possible if a critical mass of infrastructure is established across the APEC region. We will provide you with some numbers.
Sir,
Kasi
second.
dito yung presentation ng yung ng ADB, I would have given you the number.
Sir, another follow-up. Sir, you
Yeah.
mentioned there during the discussion you tackled that there are not enough infrastructure projects that are credible or bankable. What do you think are the reasons behind such gap? And
I think it's more of a technical issue, no? Just like in our own experience, we really need to come up with the technical studies, feasibility studies, and the corresponding financials. It takes some time before one is able to complete the whole process. And this is the reason why, even in our own experience, it took us some time before we were able to finalize the list of those projects. And I think at this point, there were about 8, no?
9.
There were about 9
Nine.
projects that have been awarded. And still, you have a lot of projects still in the pipeline. That took time before the PPP Center was able to finalize those plans for final disposition in terms of financing and awards. This is both solicited and unsolicited. Yeah.
and the knowledge management portal will help at the very least address those technical
Yes,
issues.
and as Usec Beltran had emphasized earlier on, this is expected to be launched in the short run. Thus, the establishment of a PP knowledge portal. Of course, what we wanted to do is also to link that knowledge portal with other existing PPP portals. So you will have an APEC PPP portals. At the same time, standardizing PPP contracts will also be very important to facilitate the launching of more PPP projects. So those are the key initiatives that have been raised during the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Okay.
Sir, good afternoon. Julius Gonzalez from Philippine Broadcasting Service. Sir, tanong ko lang po, since we've been talking about funding, financing, and investments, sir, kumusta po ang credit ratings ng Pilipinas sa ngayon?
Well, earlier we said that we have already awarded 9 PPP projects, and more projects are in the pipeline. That's one. 2, what is also critical is to scale up public spending on infrastructure. I think earlier the government has committed to double its spending on capital from 2% of GDP to 5% of GDP by 2016, by next year, because we do realize the importance of enhancing our infrastructure in the Philippines. As you know, many of the investors, both actual investors and potential investors, they have always raised the issue of infrastructure, both in the ports, airports and seaports, rails, also in terms of communications, telecommunications, and power, also in terms of the social safety nets like health, education. These are important components of ensuring sustainable economic growth. And there is no lack of public intent precisely to scale up public spending on infrastructure. Of course, the issue could be the absorptive capacity of many line agencies in undertaking those important infrastructure projects. In particular, we're referring to roads, bridges, and even transport infrastructure. So, andyan yung intensyon ng gobyerno na gumastos, andyan na yung pera. In fact, this is front-loaded, no, in the last few years. But the issue there is may mga problema rin like right of way, for example, relocation of informal settlers to other to other places. So there are both legal and extra legal issues that are involved that have resulted in impeding the quicker pace of implementing those projects.
Thank you.
I think Gov. Diwa, our friend here is also asking, wants to know the background on our credit standing, because if we want to secure more financing for infrastructure projects, so can you share more about the much improved credit standing of the Philippines?
Okay, except for Fitch, well, S&P and Moody's have already provided us one notch above the minimum investment grade rating. And Fitch, we hope that Fitch will also follow suit shortly. Now, what does it mean to have a higher than the minimum investment grade rating or credit rating? It means that investors are quite confident that we will not find it difficult to service our debt obligations. And this is a very important considerations in the calculus of potential investors, whether in the PPP projects or in other projects that may be launched in the future. That's one. Second, even if one were to source the funding from the external markets, in the pursuit of those PPP projects, for example, the cost of borrowing becomes more manageable, considering that right now, even the Philippines, our debt spread relative to EMBI or Emerging Market Bond Index, plus the Philippines, compares favorably even with some jurisdictions that are higher in terms of credit rating relative to the Philippines. Even our credit default swap points have gone down, which means that potential investors in many of our projects can expect better funding costs. Now, on the part of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, you will recall that we extended our policy on providing a additional 25% SBL on the net worth of the banks. In the past, you only have one SBL or single borrower's limit. So once the potential investors have maximized their credit with 1, 2, or 3 banks, then they can no longer borrow because of the SBL. What the BSP did was precisely to carve out another 25% SBL. In terms of SBL, 25% of the net worth of the banks. So they have greater flexibility in providing additional resources to potential borrowers, as long as they will direct the proceeds of their borrowings from the banks to funding infrastructure projects under the PPP framework.
Okay, thank you, Gov. Any more questions? Chino?
Hi, sir. Chino Laico, Manila Bulletin. Sir, question lang about sa absorptive capacity. You said that we have the excess savings, the government is very liquid, we have identified the projects, but how would you improve the absorptive capacity of the government or the country?
Napakahirap na tanong yun. Kasi as a it's both technical and otherwise. No? Technical because we need people to pin down the projects in terms of the feasibility, technical and financial feasibility of those projects. That takes time. Secondly, there are also perhaps you may call it regulatory and non-regulatory issues like those right of ways issues. Okay? that takes time, because if one were to bring you to court or the government to court because they don't want to leave the property that they are occupying at this point, then the project is delayed. Okay? So these are all factors behind our absorptive capacity. And this is also one of the reasons why people are saying it is better to put up the subway system rather than undertaking the rails above ground. Because when you do it above ground, you will have to confront the issues of right of way. You have to buy, let's say, private properties where such rails will have to go through, etc. But in terms of the subway, you're quite free to dig.
Government owned.
Yeah, to dig, and that's it. You don't have legal issues with private property.
Okay, we have room for one or two more questions. Yes, Ditas.
Hi, Gov. In terms of seeking infrastructure financing alternatives, are there proposals to set up a market for infrastructure instruments like bonds, and will retail investors be allowed to participate in this?
I think it will all depend on the proponents. No, as it is, I think we have the bond market, at least in the Philippines, has started to grow. In fact, if you look at the funding source of many corporates, the distribution between bond credit, bank credit, and bond proceeds is now shifting towards more bond rotation. Okay? Of course, malaki pa rin yung bank, yung utang mula sa bangko. But it is going up, no? Yung sourcing the funding from the bond market or from the securities market. That's one. Two, it's up to the proponents to securitize their, let's say, their exposure in infrastructure projects. No, wala namang, there's nothing that will prevent them from going into the bond market and sourcing their funds from the bond market. And therefore, whether you are talking of wholesale or retail, I think becomes a side issue. They can do it via retail, but of course, via retail will be a lot slower unless some market players will underwrite the issue. But I think it's open. Nothing prevents people from sourcing their funds from the bond market.
And there will be any restriction in terms of foreign participation?
Well, that's a. I think even our ROP
Yung
bonds are bought by non-residents. Treasury bills and treasury bonds are also available to non-residents. So I don't think it's an issue.
Okay. And Gov, after this, what happens next? Is there a timetable for the implementation of these proposed measures? Where do we go from here?
Ditas, if you look at the Pillar 4 of the Cebu Action Plan, this is accelerating infrastructure development and financing. Itong the four initiatives, I think, can be launched within the short run, like PPP Knowledge Portal, okay? Standardized PP terms and practices, long-term investment in infrastructure and urban development. The first two can be done very shortly, and then yung long-term investment, by the very nature of that initiative, it's long-term. And then yung urban development, it's a whole process of urbanization, and therefore the corresponding infrastructure complement will have to be will have to be prepared in the process in terms of knowledge sharing, of innovative financing for sustainable urban development. Wala namang I don't think, and of course this is a voluntary list of possible initiatives on the part of the APEC member countries.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, do you have one last question from the floor? Wala na. Okay, Usec, Gil, and Gov Diwa, for your closing statements, let me just throw this question. Regional meetings such as those of APEC, one of their objectives is to share knowledge. Now, with the Philippines being or initiating these talks on financial resiliency and infrastructure development, what best practices can we share to our APEC, fellow APEC members?
Oh, we are now #1 in Asia in microinsurance coverage. We have developed several microinsurance products that cater to the needs of low-income households. And we are now developing micro health products because health is another potential disaster. Once it strikes the head of the family, then it's very difficult to stand up again. Also, there are other products like agricultural index-based insurance, which we are trying to develop. And also other things like LGU, infrastructure insurance. Bobby is now, Bobby Tan, talking with the LGUs and some insurance companies to design the product.
Okay, Gov Diwa?
I think we have distinguished ourselves in terms of undertaking initiatives in microfinance, okay, consumer protection, and inclusive financial system. I think this is something that we can also share with them. We have various initiatives under this umbrella, including the tweaking of regulations to allow financial institutions to open up windows for microfinance. And the importance of microfinance is precisely to allow borrowings by micro enterprises without collateral and without credit history. But of course, the amount is quite limited. There is also the Credit Surety Fund, which the BSP has initiated. This is leveraging on our cooperatives that will allow them to borrow 10 times their minimum of 100,000 peso contribution. There is an oversight committee composed of the cooperatives themselves. Then you have Land Bank, DBP, Industrial Guarantee Loan Fund, and of course the local government. Okay. Now, about more than 1 billion pesos has been granted under this framework. Secondly, I think the good combination of monetary policy and macro-prudential policy, I think, is something that we can also share. In some jurisdictions, particularly in the advanced economies, macro-prudential measures are still in their early stage of being considered and much less implemented. Okay, in the Philippines, we have been into these macroprudential measures as a means of ensuring financial stability, given sector-specific shocks, particularly asset markets like real estate properties, and at the same time the conduct of monetary policy. Managing spillover effects has also been, I think, a good experience in the Philippines, and that is something that we can also share with them. Thirdly, of course, is the kind of financial reforms that we have undertaken in the past. We implemented Basel III earlier than 2019. We are moving quite prudently across the various components of Basel III. First with capitalization, second with stable funding ratio, liquidity ratio, etc. All of these are being done in a sequential, very prudent manner, and this is something that we would like also to share with them in case this is something that they will find useful in the process. I think those are the things that perhaps we can share with our APEC counterparts.
Okay, thank you very much. On that note, we are closing this press conference. Enjoy the rest of the day.